But okay, let's go to Smyrna real quick. If you were flying in, this is Izmir. That's the name today in Turkey of Smyrna from the Bible times. If you were landing at the airport, this is what you'd see out your window. Now, the yellow circle, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a dark patch there. That's the Roman Forum of the time of the Bible from Revelation 2. So that was the center of biblical Smyrna, which Izmir has grown all around. Now, if you want to go in the Forum, this is one of my favorite spots. And when we take people once a year, because I'm part of a seminary in Jordan, I always find a reason to go over to the Middle East. And so I would move there if I could, but we take groups of people over with us while I minister. And so one time we took them to all these churches, and other times last year we took them to all Paul's churches. But Smyrna, the message, if you were walking through that Forum area, these arches are how you walk into the Forum. And the Forum is the marketplace or agora. It's the center, the epicenter, town square of, kind of like Times Square. It's the very heart of every city was this Forum area or agora. But basically what Jesus was telling Smyrna is life is camping. Those of you who are not in 40-foot, air-conditioned motorhomes with heated floors and showers inside know that camping is uncomfortable. You get wet, and it's bumpy, and bugs, and smoke, and you got to cook, and you got to start that fire from scratch. Camping is not pleasant. My father, as Paul said, not only was a counselor that summer, but he led the honor campers up into Canada on these expeditions from the outpost out for a couple of weeks. It was just an amazing thing. It was very uncomfortable. I mean, pit toilets, eating food burned over a campfire. You know what I mean? In fact, when you go to the dining hall over there, as you're walking into the meal, on the left door, look over it, and there's a frying pan like they used to use in the Indian teepee village, cooking 21 eggs at a time. I remember that. On the other side of the lake, before East Side was there was an Indian teepee village my dad ran. And he would cook for the boys over the fire. It tasted awful. But camping, life is like camping. Yet most of us act like this is home for good. And we're putting everything into making it as most comfortable, secure, convenient life. Heaven is home. Life is camping. That's what Jesus is trying to get across to these people. Well, what's going on? In Smyrna, the event was beginning which led to the near extinction of Christianity. The closest Christianity ever got to extinction was going on at this time in Smyrna. Basically, what happened is there were these waves of persecution. The first one was Nero. It was local. It was sporadic. Nero just reached out in the time of the apostles and captured Christians. Basically, if you want to know who he got, read Romans 16. Romans 16 lists off 36 of the most notable Christians in Rome. You can bet he rounded them up, and a lot of others. And they took them and they dipped them, they tied them to poles, they dipped them in tar up to their necks, they wrapped animal skins around them, and they lit them alive on these poles as torches. They burned them alive around Nero's lake, this golden Aurea palace he had. But that was just come and go, and Nero committed suicide, and it was over for a while. But it started up again. Domitian, that's the second one. He's the one that hunted down John. And he's the one, his father was the emperor, his brother destroyed Jerusalem. Do you remember Titus? And Domitian was another member of that family, and he built all kinds of great buildings, but he didn't like the Christians. And so he hunted them down. And then a bunch of other bad guys, but that last one, see the bottom one there, Diocletian? He was the worst. By the way, he's unique of all the Roman emperors. He's the only one that retired. Did you know that? All the rest of them died on the battlefield or died of dissipation or were assassinated. Not Domitian, or Diocletian. He was so gifted, his mind, that he did everything in the Roman Empire he wanted, and he retired to what we would call Dubrovnik, over Split, that part of Croatia, wherever it is. It's on the Adriatic Sea. It's where the Game of Thrones is filmed. He built that city. And he was an amazing engineer. It's still there. But he applied that mind to the church. And what he knew is to get rid of Christianity, 3 things you had to do. Number 1, he destroyed every complete copy of the Bible. Did you know there's not a complete manuscript of the Bible that predates this guy? There are pieces, 25,000 fragments, but he destroyed every complete codex or scroll or complete copy of the New Testament. So destroy them all. Now, the church got wise, and they took their Bibles and tore them up into pieces and spread them out so they would. So we have the whole Bible in pieces. But before Diocletian, boy, I got Domitian on my mind. Before Diocletian, there are no complete manuscripts. That was the first thing. Second thing is he destroyed every meeting place. If a church met in that home, the home was destroyed. Finally, he enslaved, captured, or martyred every pastor of every church in the empire. Get rid of the leader, get rid of the meeting place, get rid of the Bible, you'll get rid of the church. Didn't work. What happened was the Christians were rounded up and brought to cliffs, like in Asia Minor, where these 7 churches are. They were brought right to the edge of the precipice. The Roman legionnaires would stand there with them in groups, like 10 wide, and the centurion would say, "Renounce Christ or we'll push you over." Well, anybody who's not a Christian would say, "I renounce him, and they'd let him go. But if you wouldn't renounce him, over the cliff you went. Do you know how long it takes to stand listening to bodies splatting and people dying before you really start wondering whether you want to go through with this? And the Roman legionnaires would martyr all the believers. But you know what? Those believers weren't cussing them out, spitting at them, yelling at them, clenching their teeth. They were sharing the gospel with them, saying, "Hey, life is camping, heaven's home. You're just sending me home. It's hard here, but can't wait to get there. But boy, you don't know where you're going. And where you're going, you're not going to wake up in a nice place. You're going to hell." They were sharing the gospel with them. And what Diocletian found was he was losing his legionnaires. They were becoming Christians faster than they could destroy the church. As Tertullian said, that the blood of the martyrs became the seed of the church. And there were more people getting saved through the execution of the believers. And so they abandoned that, and he retired, and the rest is history. But what do we learn from Smyrna? And it's time to go. Number 1, look at chapter 2, verse 8. When you and I suffer, we're sharing with Christ. Look how he introduces himself. In Revelation 2:8, he says this. I don't know why I closed my Bible. There it is. To the angel of the church in Smyrna, these things says the first and last who was dead and came to life. What's Jesus reminding him of? The price he paid. He says, "You're suffering. I suffered. I understand what you're going through. I went through what no one else has gone through. I didn't just suffer the pain. I suffered the load, the weight of the sin." Did you know that God offers supernatural joy to those who go through pain and suffering? Do you know what it says in Matthew 5? It says in Matthew 5, in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." God offers to give supernatural joy through pain and suffering. Now, I'm going to have to... My talking went longer than the time, okay? But I will tell you one thing about my friend Boaz. I was on a missionary trip when I was in college. I used to be a courier for running Bibles into northern Africa, Muslim countries, and into Eastern Europe and the Soviet bloc and all that area. That's what I would do on my summers. We smuggled Bibles. And I remember we were in Romania in 1977, 1978, and team leader said, "This is what you do. You drive into Romania with this car full of 1,800 Bibles. You park at 5:15 in front of this factory in this city, and a man will come right to the car and just get in the front seat. And he won't speak English, and you won't know who he is, but just trust him, and he'll tell you where to deliver the Bibles." I said, "Well, that sounds really like a good plan." Drive 3,000 miles, park in an unknown place in front of a factory in a communist country with the door unlocked, and let someone get in the car unannounced and just listen to him, pointing where we're supposed to go. So we prayed and did it. And this guy gets in from the factory, and he just goes, and so I was the driver. And he went, and we drove all over Romania all night long. We went from 5:15 when we picked him up till we dropped him off the next morning at 8 to go back to work. And he would sleep, on long stretches in the front seat. And then he'd wake up and say, go that way. But on the first stop, we pulled out the first batch of Bibles. And he knew where all the believers were, and we were delivering to all the churches. This guy was very connected all across the country. And I remember I had my handful of Bibles, and he was inside the house to receive them, to give to the family, and he stuck his hands out like that. And as I looked at his hands, in the darkness, I noticed his hands were the color of my skin, but all of his fingernails were dark brown. And he wasn't, into the goth stuff, painting his fingernails black. His actual fingernails were massively thick. I mean, like a third or a quarter inch thick, and dark and rough. And I just kind of was looking at those fingernails. I'd give him the Bibles. He'd go like this, and then he'd stick those blackened, thick fingernails out like that and get more Bibles. And finally, he didn't speak English, so I asked the team leader the next day. I said, hey, the guy we pick up every night and deliver Bibles with, what's the deal with he says, the fingernails. He said he gets caught almost every year by the police helping you guys deliver. And he said they do the same thing to him every year. They tie his hands down on a table so that his fingers are over the table, and the police captain has this big jackknife, and he takes a pine block and takes these slivers, pointed pieces of pine, and jams them under his fingernails, these little pine slivers, and then he takes out his lighter. Now, of course, this guy's hands are tied down, and he's like this, and he takes out his lighter and lights each of the slivers, and they burn agonizingly slowly up under his fingernails, and he says, that's why they're black. I thought, the guy sitting in the front seat with me that I can't even communicate with, who I later learned his name was Boaz, I thought, you've already done this a few times. It must hurt every time. And I thought, why are you doing that? And then I found out. Jesus says, when we live for Him and pay a price, blessed are you when they revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceedingly glad, for great is your reward in heaven. Wow. Persecution is inevitable. Jesus said He'd go with us. And He said, all that are godly in Christ Jesus